The fact that you like can't even admit that happens within your own in-groups, that's what perpetuates things like people being unwilling to answer the calls inside their own homes. That's why is most often occurring in families, in these closed religious structures that are hierarchical and that assign like magical powers to the men who have power. It just all seems like ego and narcissism and just blind indifference to the problem of human trafficking, to the plight of victims who are kids. It's so heinous.
Using a couple kids to justify making collateral damage of far more people and children. And it's amazing how believers who are so ardent that, you know, I've heard believers say, like, should be shot in the street. We need to round them all up. They need to all, like, rot in jail forever. But the minute you point out it happening in their community by their leaders,
there'll be no eternal consequences.
It's like, well, exactly. That's just collateral damage. We don't have the full story, blah, 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 blah. All the people who have education in these issues are saying, this guy in this organization is no good. The people who have personal experience being exploited in the way that he's talking about, who are experts and activists in the field like Elizabeth Smart, are saying, this guy is no good, this organization isn't doing it right.
And even mummy bloggers with no experience, but who are mothers, are saying, this guy.
So I wanted to go back to the political stuff because this whole thing is set up like it's just this easy black and white issue, good versus evil, freedom fighters versus human traffickers, you're with us or you're against us, this isn't political. And yet, this whole thing, the more I've investigated, just seems really, truly like a political maneuver, that this whole thing is being co-opted to the end, to satisfy the ends of the far-right political agenda. And
even the fact that their line is that it's not political shows that they do not understand human trafficking.
Here is a video of Tim Ballard, along with the star of Sound of Freedom, talking about the pedophile agenda.
I had to study their literature. This was a political platform. This was a political party. And what I started recognizing is I named them I call it the pedophile network doctrines. Okay.
Who's he talking about when he says I had to study the...
Just the pedophile crime industrial complex.
Oh, okay.
That's what he's saying here, is he's saying it's a political agenda and a political party.
Oh, so he's saying pedophilia as a problem
is a political party issue. Oh, God. Are you fucking kidding me? What did we learn from Jeffrey Epstein? Democrats and people from... But it's the ruling class that got away with it and that... It's also insane because we know that purity culture and religious hierarchies and patriarchal religious structures such as that found in Mormonism all contribute to pedophilia going like unnoticed and like unreported, and then when it is reported, the victims are shamed. The Mormon church, as we've talked about, is happy to cover it up. The church he's a part of was founded on pedophilia. Oh, I'm unraveling, Tanner. I'm unraveling. You can see why I've just been like furiously researching this, and the more I dig, the more I'm like, what the hell?
Separate children from parents, because parents are a bad influence. The state knows best.
He did that. He did that in his raid. He got kids separated from their parents.
Yes.
Sexualize kids. Let them see pornography, too.
Sexualizing kids. I don't... Requiring little girls to like cover up their bodies more than little boys is sexualizing kids.
Having children describe the intimate details of their sexuality to a bishop behind closed doors. That's sexualizing children.
Marrying kids. That's sexualizing kids.
3, take God out of education, because that just gets in the way.
Religion has never had a child sex abuse problem.
Yeah, if you believe in God, pedophilia just doesn't happen. Doesn't get covered up, doesn't get justified.
And kids, consent. Children can consent to anything. At 12 years old, they should be able to vote. They should be able to do anything. Now,
no one says that. No one fucking says that. Every fucking progressive person, everyone who's like progressive on sex talks about consent and how kids cannot consent. And I have never heard anything but the fact that kids cannot consent. On the other hand, I have heard hundreds, if not thousands of Mormons in our comment section telling us why it was okay for a 14-year-old girl to marry Joseph Smith. I've never heard that from an ex-Mormon or a liberal saying kids can consent. Kids cannot consent to sexual relationships with adults. Your church is founded on that.
This was the part that drove me absolutely insane, where I was like, oh, you don't understand consent at all.
No.
Because everyone who's having conversations about consent is literally giving the tools to children to understand and recognize abuse when it happens, to recognize you're the sovereign of your body and no one is allowed to touch you without your permission. Nobody is allowed to ask you to do things that you don't want to do. And that is the basis of conversations around consent. That's what we've done videos around consent. And that is the idea, is saying like, oh, the victims of Joseph Smith did not properly consent. They weren't given full agency. They were coerced. And that's what we're talking about. And he's saying that's evil. That's the plan of Satan.
The most sex positive people in our society, the people who like celebrate drag, for example, they are all the people that are the most ardently teaching kids about consent. Those are the people that are buying their kids books about consent and how no one should be able to touch your body without consent, and how fucking weird uncles shouldn't be allowed to hug you just because they, you know, no one should be able to demand a hug from you. Like anytime I give a kid a hug, I'll like ask them first, or like if they show any resistance, like never hug a kid that doesn't want to be.
This is just the classic conservative Christian idea that any discussion about sex is predatory, when in fact what they're doing right now is preventing kids from being able to understand predatory behavior so that they can perpetuate it. Because again, religion does have a huge child abuse problem, and we'll get more into that.
And kids do need to be taught about sex, like, in different ways at different developmental stages. But like, it's important to start talking to like 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds. Like, kids need to be learning about sex in a way that is relevant to where they're at. Purity culture, where you just like avoid talking about it outside the lens of shame, doesn't help kids not get abused. It gets them fucking more abused because they don't know what's happening. People like this, it's like they want to maintain this like weird illusion that kids like sexuality starts developing in kids as young as like 3 or 4, right? And it's like,
even though it's not puberty, there's still a development happening.
Yeah, I feel like people like this are like very uncomfortable with the idea that kids do have like sexual urges or input, but it's like because they're unwilling to accept that because they need to believe that kids are like these
asexual beings until someone tells them about it, or their wedding night or whatever.
Because they believe that like sex is so inherently shameful, they can't reckon with the fact that sexuality is like developing in childhood. And that's why it's important that kids get educated so they know like where, who shouldn't be able to co-opt that and like, all that stuff. You don't not have any sexual thoughts or urges until puberty. Like it's a thing that's like developing your whole life. But in their mind, that makes kids impure, and so they can't reckon with that.
Jim butted in there, Marxism. He's like, they want to sexualize kids. He's like, yeah, Marxism.
Oh yeah, Marxism.
As if like that's just in the
economic equality. That's sexualizing kids.
Das Kapital is like, and when we sexualize the children,
universal healthcare. That's sexualizing kids.
What am I seeing here? My stomach is getting sick as I'm reading this. I read this every day. It's the woke left agenda.
I'm
not saying that they're colluding or talking. It doesn't matter. It's the same dark source. But they are pedophiles are sitting back right now going, we've been pushing this agenda for decades. And now we don't have to.
It's so juvenile to even believe that pedophilia is like, it's kind of like what they did with like the gay agenda. This idea that there is like this secret union between all these. It's like pedophiles are not like hanging out in chat rooms with each other most of the time. They're like often operating alone within patriarchal, hierarchical structures, like within families. Like you're most likely to get sexually abused by like a trusted clergyman or like a family friend. Sorry, I'm becoming so unwatchable. I'm getting so riled up. This is the most riled up I've gotten so long. This is insane.
I think we're all on the same page with you. No, literally insane. Also, I think it's worth mentioning at this point that if you look at actual legislation that's happened this year, the majority of states who have passed anti-child marriage laws are liberal progressive states. Yeah. There's like one that skews a tiny bit more conservative majority, like 6% or something, maybe like Minnesota or something. But the vast majority who have put those protections in place are liberal areas, and all the states that have legalized child marriage just within the last couple years are majority conservative Christian states. So to act like this is the design of the woke left to allow pedophiles to rule and reign and take advantage of children, it's like, look at your own goddamn political platform.
We've been talking about and studying predatory polygamy and how like kids were coerced into marriage with it. it takes so much to shock me at this point, and this is really shocking me. It is a level of sin, and again, I didn't have a good opinion of Operation Underground Railroad before you told me all this, but like, this is a level of sinister that is like, that even to me is shocking.
Yeah.
When I feel like nothing surprises me anymore about like patriarchal, religious, purity culture mindsets, but this is so unhinged, like even the LDS church, like even they say some unhinged shit at their conferences, but even they keep it fucking in check more than this.
The woke left. That's the problem.
Like that is the most perfect way to, like, pedophilia is not like a fucking political party affiliation problem. Although, I mean, there is something to be said for like people that don't adhere to purity culture and like more shame-based ideas about sex are less likely to have their sexuality come out in dysfunctional ways, such as like exerting power over kids. Like, so there is something to be said there, but it's like relegating it to like a liberal problem is just immediately making them completely blind to all the calls coming from inside their own houses. And like the bare minimum we should all be able to accept if we like care about solving pedophilia is that like it's not an issue that cares about party lines. Insanity.
Push anymore because the left is taking care of it for us in America. And this whole trans voice on children. You know, again, I'm libertarian. Adults, do what you want. I'll fight for your right to do whatever you want.
Even the fact that you're making like trans kids like a sexual issue is like telling.
Just a technicality. He also calls himself a libertarian, and libertarians are notoriously famous for not believing in borders or border walls. But I mean, I do not think it's an exaggeration to say this whole thing is literally propaganda, whether it intends to be or not.
I genuinely believe that Tim Ballard is so, from what I can see just on that video and everything I've heard, is so lost in his own narcissism and is so unconscious of his own ideology. So completely unconscious of reality that, like, I'm sure he buys that on, you know, I don't think he's like actively, consciously trying to be a propaganda machine,
sure.
But like he is just not like with it. He's not aligned with like facts, reason, evidence. He's gone.
And this is all like textbook propaganda where you have literal demonization of an opposing party. Like, this whole thing is set up to make you believe that it's the woke left.
Did they fund this movie?
That is driving human trafficking.
Did Tim Ballard fund this movie?
Yeah, this is his movie.
The
it's
fact
about
that
him.
He fucking funded a movie
about
that
himself.
positions him as the hero.
Yeah, one of my favorite cartoonist, Grant Morrison, talks about the end of the hero's journey as this idea of the boy hero who just has to come in and break the right skulls and then the problem is solved.
Yeah.
And realizing that real solutions are networks of people.
Communities.
Yes, exactly.
Yep. That's what I'm saying. It's like anyone who had like a true understanding of the issue would want to highlight it as because that's how we solve global issues, national issues, local issues, is as communities. So constantly like peddling stories where like one single person is the hero is not really that advantageous, because then that just kind of like is making activism more individualistic, which is the last fucking thing we need.
And this is why, you know, I brought in Glenn Beck and all those other things, is like his background, his literal study wasn't in trafficking, wasn't in therapy or trauma-informed care or anything like that.
This
It was
man
literally
has not done
political,
any of his
like
self-work.
conservative political science.
Yeah.
Like, how do we address and implement the aims of the far right? And all of this has aided in the discourse of demonizing the left, the woke agenda, and queer people as the imminent problem, and not the vast majority of cases that are taking place in the very religions that these men are part of.
This is insanity. Why? In and of itself, it's horrible. But what it's going to lead to is what the pedophiles have been asking for. If you can consent to that, guess what? What's more fluid than gender? Age.
Notoriously, the one thing that isn't fluid.
The most quantifiable thing you could.
How many revolutions around the sun you can if you can deny.
He's like, what's more qualitative than that? Numbers. What the fuck? What do you want about? Again, like kids being trans has nothing to do with having sex with adults. First of all, those are two completely separate things. Kids identifying with the gender they were assigned at birth doesn't really have anything to do with sex. You can be trans and gay, you can be trans and straight.
Asexual,
it doesn't mean anything. So these are the people that sexualize kids. Like, gender is so sexual to you that you can't. Sorry.
No, I this has been me alone in my room for the last week, just been like
processing all this live on camera. Like, I'm really sorry, you guys.
No, it's really, really intense. And again, the more that I've dug, the more I'm like, oh, this is completely off the rocker and total just right-wing propaganda. Did you know that Tim Ballard is the author of several religious conspiracy theory books?
Unsurprised at this point.
That are also sold by, guess who?
Deseret.
The LDS Church's publishing branch, Deseret Book. His book, The Washington Hypothesis, a modern-day investigator explores the possible connection between the American Covenant, Latter-day Temples, and George Washington. He's operating under the paradigm that the United States was supposed to be like the new Israel, and that God offered a covenant with America through the founding fathers so that we could be this city on a hill, this embodiment of a Christian nation on earth, and that Washington was an instrumental player in that and paved the way for the restoration through Joseph Smith.
Stop making everything about you.
Like, on the surface alone is like, okay, well, that's complete hokum. Yeah, a literal religious conspiracy theory.
Any religion could be like, yeah, America was founded so we could exist. Cool.
But the irony is just so beyond ridiculous. The fact that George Washington was himself a lifelong slave owner, that his goddamn teeth were slave teeth. So to act like, let me read you the blurb of the book. He said, it starts off, "We know that George Washington was a moral and inspiring leader, but did he possibly know more than what he supposed? No more than we suppose? Was he a national covenant maker like Moses, Abraham, Lehi, or Captain Moroni?"
Your organization is called Operation Underground Railroad.
Which was the original Underground Railroad, literally getting people out of the system that this guy built. The United States was built by traffickers. This is a society where the traffickers won, where they were established, where this was all normalized, where he owned literal people. He bought children. George Washington bought literal children. And so for you to be like, oh, George Washington was this righteous man, and now I'm part of his legacy that's going to help save slaves who are even worse than the black people were. It's like, how do you not see the irony? How do you not see the absolute hypocrisy? That guy was a literal slave trader, a literal human trafficker in a society overrun with human trafficking in a country that legalized slavery as a fundamental premise, where all humans weren't created equally, where women didn't have rights, where, it's like,
but because Tim Ballard does not fucking know what human trafficking is. He does not know. He only understands it through the lens of, like, kids' sex. He doesn't even see the fucking irony of, like, this is a man that owns slave. That's what human trafficking is. He was a good trafficker. He was a good one.
The slaveholders in the Bible, good traffickers. Those are good traffickers.
It's like, well, it wouldn't surprise me if Tim Ballard was of the belief that, like, slavery was fine and, like, God ordained. I mean, that's what his religious leaders that founded the religion that he thinks America was founded for also taught.
Yeah, Joseph Smith gave a lengthy treatise on the divine role of slavery. Brigham Young advocated for slavery.
Why is it so fucking classic that, like, the things that people advocate for are the things that they themselves are the most implicated in? It's so classic.
Human nature. Thank you, Carl Jung, for pointing it out to us.
Thank you, Carl. He probably sucked as well. He probably fucking... I don't know. I don't know anything.
Don't trust it. Yeah, let's just not penalize anybody.
Never trust a man in history, I'll tell you that.
Pretty safe
Women
rule.
are dubious too,
rule.
but, like, they didn't have the power.
Yeah, so there's just... Tim Ballard has a ton of books like that, just total religious conspiracy theory. And if you want, maybe we'll read one for Patreon or something. It would be harrowing, but I'd be willing to do it. You would have to give
me quite a bit of money to do that. $564,000 a year, shall we say.
So exactly like we've been talking about, that, these people in these systems that have historically and presently normalized, facilitated, institutionalized, and justified the very problems that you claim to be fighting. Jim Caviezel, the actor who got famous for playing Jesus in the Mel Gibson film Passion of the Christ.
That's why he's playing Tim.
He's playing Tim. And Tim said about him, "I don't trust Hollywood, but I know one thing about Jim Caviezel. I know he loves Jesus, and that is important to me. Someone who loves the Lord, I can at least trust in that." So then I have pulled up his Wikipedia page, old Jim, and it says Jim Caviezel is a devout Catholic. In 2017 interview, he talked about the importance of his Catholic faith, the lasting impact of the Passion of the Christ, etc. Well, as we know, the Catholic Church has never had a problem with abuse.
You can trust the Catholics with kids.
Some just really quick Googling pulled up some numbers. In France alone, in the past 70 years, 333,000 children were abused by priests in France alone in the last 70 years alone. 333,000 kids. Tim Ballard's claimed, and his claims have been, critics and people who have worked said that he's beefed up the numbers, he's exaggerated his role in things. Even at his most inflated estimation, it's still less than it's a couple thousand people that he's impacted.
Yeah.
One country, if he just went after the Catholic Church in one city alone, would do more than this entire work, than a border wall, than any other effort that he's making. In Ireland alone, underage victims estimated at nearly 15,000 between 1970 and 1990
Again,
alone.
Much smaller country than America. Tiny. Ireland is freaking tiny.
15,000 in 30 years. Catholic Church, one country
that we know of.
Alone. That we know of. Australia. And these are just some some white countries that are easy to do research on. There's so much more all over the world. In Australia alone, 4,444 incidents of child sexual abuse reported to church authorities.
Reported. Yeah.
In the United States, the 2002 Boston Globe, this was the Spotlight article we talked about earlier, uncovered 11,000 complaints of abusive actions by priests.
Those are just the ones where a complaint has been filed. Yeah. Because so much of the time in religion, because of the nature of the hierarchy of it all, that people don't feel safe coming forward. Also, there's so many times where kids come forward to their parents, and because their parents are such devout believers in those hierarchies and in the magical powers of the clergy, they'll punish them for speaking out. Mm-hmm. So it never gets to be properly reported or anything.
Got some data to back that up. This is from the New York Times. More than 1,900 minors were abused by people in the Catholic Church in Illinois alone.
In Illinois.
Over 70 years.
Just reported and just in Illinois.
So get this. At first, the disclosed... before the investigation, the church disclosed some 100 cases. We've had about 100 cases. Soon after the investigation opened, the church was just so you know, it's actually closer to 175.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And so almost double what they initially disclosed. Then during the investigation, when all the numbers are coming up, they were actually it's closer to 340 people. So again, initially before they're
we
about 100.
Finding all these extra records.
Then and then finally, as it's all gone on, the church was okay, there was actually about 340, which is however many times more. And then after the report disclosed that there were actually over 450 cases, compared that to the initial 100 disclosed. Mm-hmm. So that's in one city in America.
And you never know. You'll never know the final numbers for anything like that.
Right. And
because of the structure of religions like that.
And while this is all going on, by the way, Fox News, the main proponent of the voice of the right in America today, who Glenn Beck, Tim's primary financier, was a pundit on Fox News for a long time. Now he does his own thing. But it's interesting to note, I have a graph here showing that while this was going on, this expose in the church in Illinois was happening, Fox coverage gave
2 hours, 12 minutes, 32 seconds toward the Target Pride backlash, and a total of 22 seconds to the Illinois Catholic Church
Who gives
abuse.
a shit about Target's Pride collection?
Literally people who are trying to divert the attention away from the actual problem. Because the numbers aren't lying here. There is way the fuck more abuse going on in the Catholic Church alone than any effort on Tim Ballard or anybody associated with him in the direction that they're heading, or problems. I'm not going to say there's never been any abuse in the LGBT community. There's never been a predator. There's no trans predators out there. Of course, there's literally every community, and we have to be able to watch out for our own community and to call it out when it happens, which is why we left the church in the first place. But even if you crunch the numbers of instances in the LGBT community, however you measure that, and we don't have like a religion that meets with this president that you have to defer to it in all cases and never allowed to criticize, like it's not the same thing at all. But even if you take those cases, the numbers aren't even close. Like we're talking like comparing mountains to galaxies. Like there's just no comparison to the scale of abuse that's going on that Tim Ballard and Jim Caviezel are just completely ignoring so that they can play action heroes by tearing apart the families of poor people.
I do believe that there are people who are, people who can just be genuinely misinformed about the issue. But I'm like, especially if you're claiming to be like any kind of activist in this area, to be so willfully indifferent to what like the reality of kids getting abused is, while taking in so much money, while like claiming to be experts, blah, 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 you are, in my opinion, like at that point complicit in child abuse. If you are like claiming to be fixing it and showing such like willful you don't want to know what's true. You only care about like, positioning yourself as a hero in the story. I mean, there is evidence that OUR has like actually worsened the problem of human trafficking, and all of their political beliefs are fully in line with worsening the problem of human trafficking. But it's just like, to show that level of like deliberate ignorance, but it also can just be like pure delusion. Like I also believe that. Like I don't think any of this is conscious.
Jim is fully delusional. Here's
Jim's fully delusional more than Tim.
I mean, there are two peas in a pod. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I've heard from the people who worked on some of the marketing things around him that working with this guy is a nightmare because he is just off the deep end. In fact, here, listen to this. This is from an article in the Houston Chronicle. And they were talking about Jim Caviezel, going around with Tim Cruise, who I do not have favorable.
Tim Cruise, the son of Tom Cruise? No, genuinely.
Tim Cruise, the Texas senator and resident piece of shit.
Never heard of him.
You never heard of Tim Cruise?
No, I tried to stay off Twitter.
I am so jealous of you. Yeah. He is
I mean, I can imagine when you said
a horrible human being. Anyway. So this is from the Houston Chronicle. He says, Caviezel openly embraces one of the most extreme versions of the QAnon conspiracy theory. The simpler version basically posits, without evidence, that military insiders are pursuing a secret plan to persecute a fictitious global cabal of pedophilic Satan worshippers. Okay, so yeah, typical QAnon, that military insiders and paramilitary groups like Tim Ballard and Donald Trump are getting together to bring down this evil cabal. Caviezel and others on the fringes of the conspiracies community of believers take it a step further, claiming also with zero evidence that members of the cabal torture infants and young children to extract a substance called adrenochrome from their bodies on a massive scale, while promoting Sound of Freedom in a recent interview with Steve Bannon. Now, if you don't know Steve Bannon, dude is an absolute piece of scum, far-right extremist and conspirator, worked on Donald Trump's cabinet, was eventually found guilty of all these things, of course was pardoned by Trump, but Trump has disavowed him and he's disavowed Trump. Behind a lot of like really nefarious shit for a long time. Anyway, while promoting Sound of Freedom with Steve Bannon, Caviezel can be heard openly espousing his baseless conviction that the underground adrenochrome trade is a multi-billion-dollar industry. The claim appeared to elicit skepticism from Bannon, a former top advisor to Trump, who pushed Caviezel to back it up with, "Give me some facts so people don't think we're off in conspiracy theory land." Caviezel responded by discussing media reports on Hunter Biden's laptop. If fucking Steve Bannon is calling you out for your lack of evidence and saying you're off in conspiracy theory land, like, you have nothing. You think you can trust this guy Tim Ballard just because he's Catholic? What?
Life is so short. We all only get one. I can't wrap my head around, like, the colossal waste of a life and of, like, energy and resources that it is to be, like, espousing this idea that, like, the beliefs that you proclaim publicly, as in, like, your political affiliation or whatever, that your beliefs determine whether or not you might be a pedophile. I'm like, it's just, like, so far removed from anything productive. It's so, like, it's so fucking absurd. I don't even think good.
You want universal healthcare? You're probably a pedophile.
The fact that you, like, can't even admit that pedophilia happens within your own in-groups, that's how
slavery.
That's what perpetuates things like pedophilia, is people being unwilling to answer the calls inside their own homes. Like, that's why pedophilia is most often occurring in families, in, like, these closed religious structures that are hierarchical and that assign, like, magical powers to the men who have power. Oh, Tanner.
So that's that on OUR.
Is that the Tim Ballard video done? Oh, thank God. I really, like, wanted it to be done because I was like, I feel like I'm being...
Yeah. Kind of just fire hosed. It's not a good look. Like I said, I went into this really trying to give it a fair shake and try to understand where criticizers are coming from and see if there was, like... And again, like I said in the beginning, if that good has been done, and in the cases where it has, I want to, like, fully acknowledge and applaud.
No, I want to say,
cannot turn away from the vast amount of damage that has been done.
If Tim Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad has done good, it is, like, despite themselves. As much as, like, beliefs don't determine your character, it's like ideology does matter. And if you have, like, an ideology that is completely antithetical to solving the problem that you claim you want to solve and is actually worsening it, then it's like, okay, maybe you, like, save a few kids here and there, but then you've made life worse for so many other people. It's like, it is such a clear net negative that it almost doesn't matter that you say, I mean, you know, it matters for those few kids and that is awesome, but, like, is there any proof that, like, anyone has been saved and then got the aftercare? I mean, I haven't seen it. It just all seems like ego and narcissism and just blind indifference to the problem of human trafficking, to the plight of victims who are kids. It's so heinous.
You know, using a couple kids to justify making collateral damage of far more people and children. And it's amazing how believers who are so ardent that, you know, I've heard believers say, like, pedophiles should be shot in the street. We need to round them all up. They need to all, like, rot in jail forever. But the minute you point out it happening in their community by their leaders,
there'll be no eternal consequences.
It's like, well, exactly. That's just collateral damage. We don't have the full story, blah, 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 blah.
Also, just really, like, pedophiles should be shot in the streets. It's also true that, like, a lot of sexual abuse perpetrators were at one point victims. Again, highlighting how it is a systemic problem, and it's not just like this thing of everyone just wakes up and chooses to do evil and chooses to be it's like, no, there's probably wired into their brains before they were even old enough to understand it. Like, their sexuality, like, developed in alongside them being abused. I mean, it's just
in a really
so complicated.
In a really high sex shame culture where there aren't healthy outlets for that.
And refusing to reckon with any of that, it's just obvious point, but these people have no business being involved in any of this. Go to school for something, you know, like, go take a course on childhood trauma, or, you know what I mean? Just, like, do anything but this. Like, leave it to the experts.
Study your own church's history. Anything. Take a hard look at your founding fathers who you admire so much.
He's never even met his inner child. Like, he's like, it should not be in the business of he should never be around children. Adults can't even stand to be around him.
So, in summary, all the people who have education in these issues are saying this guy in this organization is no good. The people who have personal experience being exploited in the way that he's talking about, who are experts and activists in the field like Elizabeth Smart, are saying this guy is no good, this organization isn't doing it right.
And even mummy bloggers with no experience, but who are mothers, are saying fuck this guy, even though they went into it buying into his book. That's the thing. It's like to become disillusioned is kind of a big deal, again, because it... just coming out.
Yeah, so is it an anti-Mormon conspiracy? I don't really think so.
Grow up if you think. Sorry.
If anything, I'm seeing a bias against Mormons for having an in-group bias that precludes them from identifying real solutions to real problems and instead fighting shadow people, the woke left, etc.
Yeah.
And aggregating a ton of money and fame for someone to do as little as possible effective work while they get all the glamour and trappings, etc. And pushing the far-right narrative and political agenda.
It's just all about centering a white man's false narrative about life. And that's what the Mormon Church is founded on, Joseph Smith's white ethnocentric narrative of Native American history. And now they're doing it with this, and like, you know, Tim's at the helm and he's the white savior now. Like, all of it is just like prioritizing delusional white male ideas about what's true, and anyone who like speaks up about facts is called a bitch. Sorry, I have nothing new to say.
It's, you know, it's a lot, and it's very grim.
Again, it really takes a lot to make me this like riled up at this point in our YouTube career.
Well, thank God it's over. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you for your continued support of the channel. If you would like to support and see other videos like this, please subscribe to us on Patreon. We're reading a series called Stephanie about a Mormon teenager who ends up in rehab. It's a lot of fun, and not as heavy as this, I promise.
Not heavy, but we do...
Insightful.
Yeah, it's like nice to address systemic issues through a fun, funny lens.
Through fiction, where the repercussions and collateral damage are not as real as what we're seeing here.
Sorry if I've just been an off-putting character in this video.
I think everyone is right there with you. I've been sitting in this for over a week now, and have just been like endlessly researching, because the more I dig, the more I'm like, this is just crazy.
Yeah, it's even more fucked up.
I think everyone watching it is going to be feeling the same way, so.
Yeah, if you made it this far in the video as well, like, hope you're doing all right. Let's all go and do some, dare I say, aftercare. Look after ourselves, because I feel like this is really heavy. Yeah. And it's going to be kind of weird to like just jump back into life now. Like, I feel like I need to decompress emotionally.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you so much. We love you. Sorry if this was a difficult topic. Hopefully we've added a little bit to the discussion. If you have any insights or anything that you would like to share, please do so in the comments, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.